sustainable, and intentionally missional ministry in the Diocese of Central Newfoundland. Welcome to the future. We thought we were on the right path to revitalizing the church. So what's happened? How did we get from there to here? Let's talk about that for a few minutes. First of all, shifts in culture. Let's take a little trip down memory lane. I expect most of us watching this video can relate to, when we grew up, you had to go to church. When we grew up, school and church were well connected. When we grew up, what the church said was listened to by the community, and it became part of the normal understanding of what should be in the lives of people who lived in our town. I remember when we grew up, if there was a death in the parish, the bingo would be cancelled, dances would be cancelled, and during the funeral, many stores would even close out of respect for these people. In essence, people were afraid not to do what the church said they were supposed to do. And most people back in them days went to church. And I'm often fond of saying, in those days, if you didn't go to church, there was something wrong with you and your family. That's changed, isn't it? Today, people are saying, if you go to church, there's something wrong with you. And I remember in relation to the community, church and school were so well connected. Every school had some form of doctrinal education. Now, let's be honest. The church's rules around marriage and baptism and confirmation and so on created this platform for churchgoers to judge others. Some pretty harsh comments were made in those years. For example, unmarried parents. You were called common law by the government, but most of our people said you were shacking up. Single mothers. Often if you had a child and you weren't married, they would baptize the baby, but the baby would not be baptized in public worship. And across the register, some of the clergy would write illegitimate. If you were divorced, in order to get remarried, you had to jump through a lot of hoops. And I remember, perhaps for me, one of the most difficult memories is when someone came to the church to have a baby baptized, and they weren't regular churchgoers. They might have been a young person, a young family, who were there, and they were half afraid to be there anyway. And after the service was over, someone would inevitably say, well, you won't see that crowd anymore until there has another one. We were safe to think that way. Well, that's part of the problem. Remember at the end of the year, churches would publish a subscribers list? That list contains your name and the exact amount of money that you gave that year. I remember hearing church wardens say, if they won't give it of their own free will, we'll shame them into giving it. Well, things really started to change for us in the 90s. But for some reason, we kept trying the same tactics. And sadly, in our churches today, some people think that we should still be doing that. Well, you know what? It doesn't work anymore. So that's shifts in culture. Now let's think about this. There have been shifts in the way people think about God. We have a greater understanding today about human psychology. What used to be identified and explained by religion as demonic or sinful has now been explained by science. And some faith communities have adjusted to that. For example, same-sex relationships. Others are just not willing to move beyond narrow religious boundaries. And no matter how you look at it, Jesus said the church should be one. If you've got 10 or 20,000 different Christian denominations and every one of them thinks they're right, how in the world can we expect people to be attracted to that? The internet has drawn the world together and enabled a flow of ideas and opinions and benefits and stories of institutional abuse. The revealing of abuse, the revealing of control by religious institutions has broken down the authority and the power that society once gave the church. People no longer accept what institutions say at face value. For years we knew about residential schools. For years we knew about gender persecution, starving people, prejudice, injustice, and equality. And you know what's happened? Now society at large is doing something about that, and they're calling people into accountability, whether it's a government, whether it's a church, whether it's an institution, and many of them are pointing their finger right at the church. The next shift, is in our scientific discoveries. My grandfather was a very intelligent man. He was a young man in the time before we knew what bacteria or germs were. Sickness and death, calamity and disaster were often seen as a sign of God's anger and judgment. My grandfather never believed that human beings walked on the moon, and he firmly believed in fairies. Can you imagine what his grandfather knew to be true? Scientific advances have helped us and challenged us socially, theologically, and culturally. You know, we are the beneficiaries of scientific advances in education, in vaccines, in treatments, and all sorts of definitive human discoveries around race and gender and just where the human race began. Genetic discoveries are not theory, they're true. And they show that humans are part of nature, that humans are not above nature, we're not the crown of nature, that we are created, but we are part of the bigger picture. We have not been set aside. And that's a big theological challenge for the church. That's changed the way people think about God, especially young people. I'm excited about that because we're moving into an era of truth where science is saying this is true, and the church needs to say this is where God is in the midst of that. I'm not sure we're doing a very good job of that. So here's my point. What about our diocesan mission statement? Is it still relevant? Oh yes. In fact, when I read it, sometimes I am humbled and amazed at how it connects to our time and situation from the past. That's what prophecy is about. I believe that our diocesan mission statement is a prophetic word from those who loved our beloved church so many years ago. It's amazing how relevant it still is. And when you look at the essence of our mission statement, you will find what we need today. Images of walking in humility, trusting in Jesus, being led by the Spirit in a relationship with God, responding to God's call to be a servant presence in the communities in which we live. That is the church that Jesus was trying to build at the very beginning. People who walk in the love and unity and grace that Jesus taught. Simple, loving people of God claim no authority over the way people should live and think, and no power but that of a love that is proven by the way we live in community. The time has come. We can delay no longer. We need to take an honest look at who we are in relationship with God and with each other. We need to stop pointing the finger at people and start serving people. We need to see the needs of the world, engage the questions that the world is asking, and do our best to share a humble faith in the midst of each encounter and discussion. We need to stop trying to answer questions that no one is asking anymore. So before we move on now, let me ask you to consider this very important question. Are we simply trying to manage decline in the church? Or are we honestly seeking ways to partner with God to share the love of Jesus in new, Spirit-led ways in our time? God is calling us to come out and partner, come out and play, come out and weep with the world, and to be an important part of God's plan for all creation. The Anglican Diocese of Central Newfoundland, in response to the love of God, is called to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ by worship and sacrament, by word and action, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit. Following Jesus, we are led to be a servant community which ministers and witnesses in the world to the transforming power of God's love. Thank you for sharing this time with me. God bless you.